The front door opened at 4 minutes past 6 on a Thursday morning, and my son walked through it without knocking. He did not take his shoes off. He did not say good morning. He came straight down the hallway with his wife 3 steps behind him, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "Where is the money, Dad?" Not, "Where is our money? Where is the money?" As if it had always been his. His wife went past both of us into the kitchen, and I heard a drawer open before I could say a word. She was looking for a statement or a card or anything with a number on it. And I stood in my own hallway in a house I have lived in for 38 years, and I did not say a thing. Because there was a camera above the door that had been running since Monday, and everything he was about to say was already being recorded. But I need to go back. I need to take you back about 3 years, because none of this started at a front door. It started at a kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold and a question that sounded like kindness. And before that morning was over, 2 people I had shared Christmas dinner with would be sitting in the back of a patrol car. My name is Thomas Hadley. Most people call me Tom. I am 67 years old, and I have lived in the same house in Barton, Ohio since 1984. It is a 3-bedroom ranch on Maple Street with a front porch that faces east and a yard I have mowed every Saturday since the week we moved in. I drive a '94 Ford that has more rust than paint. I have an old beagle named Charlie who has never done one useful thing in 11 years and who I love more than most of what I own. Every morning I eat eggs and wheat toast at a place called Howell's Diner on Oak Street. Same booth, same waitress, same coffee since 1987. I fix things for my neighbors. Screen doors, running toilets, a porch rail that wobbles. I do not charge and I do not stay for coffee. I just do the work and I go home. Last month I replaced a screen door for a woman on Elm Street whose husband died in January, and when I was done she tried to hand me a 20 and I said, "No ma'am," and I meant it. That is who I am in this town. An old man with a truck and a beagle and a booth at a diner. What most people do not know is that I spent 32 years as a home inspector, and before that I did 8 years in the Army Corps of Engineers doing structural assessment of damaged buildings in places I am not going to name. I learned something in those years that stayed with me for every inspection I ever did after. Damage does not always look like damage. Sometimes it looks like a solid floor. And the only way to know is to stop trusting what the surface is telling you and start listening to what the structure is hiding. Hold on to that, because in about 10 minutes I am going to tell you that the most important thing I ever missed was not behind a wall. It was sitting across my kitchen table. My wife was Margaret. Everybody called her Maggie. She taught 4th grade at Barton Elementary for 29 years. She could quiet a room of 32 children with one look over her glasses, and she had a laugh that started low and built until the whole table was in on it, whether they had heard the joke or not. She made meatloaf on Wednesdays, and the whole house smelled like onion and breadcrumb by 4 in the afternoon, and some evenings I would come home from a job and stand in the doorway just breathing it in before I said a word. She died 4 years ago this past March, pancreatic. They found it in November, and she was gone by the spring, and I am not going to try to describe those 5 months, because there is no sentence sufficient for watching the woman who built your life leave it on a Tuesday afternoon while you are holding her hand. What I will tell you is what she used to say to me. I would come home frustrated from a job where a seller had lied about the foundation, and I would sit at the kitchen table and go on about it for 10 minutes. Maggie would pour me coffee and sit across from me and wait until I ran out of words. Then she would say the same thing she always said. The house always tells you, Tom. You just have to stop talking long enough to hear it. She said it about houses. She meant it about everything. People, situations, family. The truth is always speaking. Most of us are just making too much noise to catch it. And the louder you love somebody, the harder it is to hear what the structure is trying to tell you about them. I did not understand how right she was until I learned it the hardest possible way. And I am the one man in Barton, Ohio, who should have understood it sooner, because I spent my whole career listening to what structures were hiding, and I missed the one that mattered most. If any of this is already settling into your chest, if you have ever poured a second cup of coffee for somebody who is not coming back to drink it, I hope you will stay with me. Subscribe to this channel so stories like this keep reaching people who need to hear them, because what comes next is the part I could not have imagined and could not have survived without the things that woman taught me. After Maggie died, the house got quiet, not peaceful. The kind of quiet that has weight. The coffee maker still runs at 5:30 every morning because I never change the timer. 2 cups. I pour one and drink it on the porch, and the other sits on the counter until I pour it out at noon. That sounds small. It is not small. It is the loudest thing in my day, and I do not think I will ever stop doing it. Our son is Daniel. Everybody calls him Danny. He is 39. He was a quiet boy who liked to take things apart and who used to sit in the garage watching me sharpen drill bits, asking about load-bearing walls. He graduated with a business degree and took a job selling medical equipment because the economy was bad and the job was there. He has been doing it for 17 years and never once said anything good about it. Hold on to that too. 2 years after Maggie died, Danny married a woman named Claire. She is 36. She works in financial consulting for a firm in Columbus. She is smart and sharp, and she remembers what you said 3 Thanksgivings ago and brings it up in a sentence that sounds casual but is not. When Danny brought her home for the first time, I wanted to like her. I need you to hear that. My son was smiling for the first time since we buried his mother, and I would have given anything to let that be enough. But Maggie taught me something over 42 years. She taught me that when you want something badly, you will explain away what you see. And what I saw the first time Claire walked through my front door was a woman whose eyes went to the crown molding before they went to me. She scanned that room the way an appraiser scans a property. Not admiring, measuring. I have spent 32 years watching people look at houses, and the ones who are calculating do not tilt their head the way the ones who are appreciating do. I told myself it was nerves. And here is the part that makes it complicated, because it should be complicated, otherwise this is just a story about a bad person, and those are easy. On the first anniversary of Maggie's death, Claire came to the house by herself. She brought a small pot of African violets and set them on the kitchen windowsill without saying a word. Then she said, "I know these were her favorite, Tom." My throat closed. Maggie had kept violets on that sill for 20 years, and they had all died the winter after she did because I forgot to water them and could not bring myself to replace them. And Claire noticed, and she replaced them. And for a moment in that kitchen, with morning light coming through the window and the smell of potting soil, I thought I had been wrong about everything. I held on to that moment for a long time. Too long, because that is what a near miss looks like. Something close enough to real that you keep your hand on the lever. The first year was fine on the surface. Danny came around on Sundays. He mowed the lawn and fixed the downspout on the garage. Claire was pleasant and asked about my week. But things shifted, and the shift was so slow that if you were not paying attention, you would have called it nothing. At a dinner about 14 months in, Claire looked around the kitchen and said, "You know, Tom, this place could really use some updating for resale value down the road." Danny looked at his plate, and I want you to understand what that phrase does when you are 67 years old, sitting in the only house you have ever owned. Resale value, down the road. Those are measurements, not conversation. 2 months later, at a restaurant for Danny's birthday, Claire was short with a waitress. The girl brought water with no lemon, and Claire said, "It is not complicated." Danny said nothing. He looked at his glass, and that was the first time I noticed the silence. Not her rudeness, his silence. Because Danny used to argue with me about drywall technique when he was 14. And he was sitting there watching his wife talk down to a 19-year-old girl, and his mouth was shut. Then the Sunday visits dropped from every week to every month. Danny started looking thinner, not sick, drained, and he started deferring. Every question I asked him, his eyes would go to Claire first, just for a half second, like a student checking with a teacher. I told myself he was busy. All of it true, none of it the real answer. And none of those things explain what happened next. 20 months after the wedding, Danny came over alone. He sat at the kitchen table in the chair his mother used to sit in, and he said, "Dad, I have been thinking about your finances." He said it was a lot to manage alone. The pension, Social Security, property tax. He said it was not my generation's thing, and he wanted to help. I looked at my son, and I saw Maggie's eyes in his face, and I said, "All right." That Friday, I drove to the credit union and added his name to the checking account. And I drove home feeling like I had done something right. Trust is the most expensive thing a person can hand over, because you do not find out the price until it is already spent. 3 months later, I was at Howell's on a Tuesday morning, same booth. And Helen, who has worked the counter for 22 years, leaned over and said, "Tom, are you doing all right with money?" She said her daughter works at the credit union, and there had been activity on my account that did not look right. I left my breakfast on the table. I drove straight there, and Sandra, the branch manager, pulled up my account and turned the screen toward me. 14 withdrawals in 3 months. $340, 520. 715, not round numbers. Round numbers look like decisions. These look like bills, ordinary, the kind of amounts you would skate past on a statement. And every one was within 2 days of my pension deposit. Sandra said, "Tom, did you authorize these?" I did not say my son's name for about 10 seconds. Then I said, "My son has access." And Sandra looked at me the way I have looked at 1,000 homeowners when I found something behind their wall they did not want to know about. I did not confront Danny. Instead, I did what I have done for 40 years when I find damage. I kept looking. I went home and opened the file cabinet in the hallway that still has Maggie's handwriting on the label, and I pulled every statement going back 3 years. Maggie kept everything. Binders in the hall closet going back to our first year in that house, tabbed and labeled in her school teacher print. I used to tease her about it. Who was ever going to read all that? She would say, "Somebody will." I sat at that table for 2 nights with 3 highlighters. Yellow for questionable, orange for definitely not ours, green for anything I could match to a real bill. There was very little green. 26 months of withdrawals, 81 transactions. The total at 2 in the morning with the rooster clock ticking on the wall was $87,400. I stared at that number and I did not move. I thought about Danny at 9 years old sitting in that chair doing his math homework while Maggie made meatloaf, the smell of onion and breadcrumb, and I thought about how a house can look like it is standing and be completely gutted on the inside, and how you can live in one for 38 years and not know it. I called Richard Cole the next morning. He is 63. His office is on 2nd Street above the hardware store. He did Maggie's will and has done my taxes for 20 years. He read the statements for about 9 minutes. Then he took his glasses off and said something I will never get out of my head. He said, "The access is not the crime, Tom. The access is the part he asked permission for." That sentence broke the floor out from under me. It meant when my son sat at my kitchen table and offered to help with bills, he was not starting something. He was formalizing something he had already been doing for months through an online login he set up for us in 2019 and never removed himself from. Richard told me to pull everything. I found 3 credit cards in my name totaling $22,000 and a personal loan application for $15,000 with my signature on the bottom. I picked up that application and the signature was close. Very close. The T was right and the H was right, but my Y drops. It always has. Every Y I have ever written falls below the line because my hand is already moving to the next letter. That Y sat level, neat, patient, and I heard Maggie as clearly as if she were standing behind me. The house always tells you, Tom, you just have to stop talking long enough to hear it. I had finally stopped talking. Before I continue, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you are watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every single one, and knowing you are out there keeps these stories going. Richard laid it out on a Tuesday. Elder, financial exploitation, forgery, identity theft. He said, "You cannot confront him." I said, "He is my son." Richard said, "The second he knows 2 things happen. He starts explaining, and he will be good at it because he has had 26 months to practice, and every document still in his house goes in a bag." He said, "Here's what you do instead. You cut it off without a word, and you let him show you who he is." And I said, "How?" And Richard said, "He will come to the house." That night, I went to the garage and opened a Foot Locker I had not opened in 15 years. Olive green with my name stenciled on the side. Inside it was a set of dog tags and a photograph of Maggie standing on the tarmac the day I came home from my last deployment. She was 29 in that photograph, wearing a yellow dress and not smiling, because she told me later that smiling would have made her cry. I sat on the floor with that photograph in my hands, and Charlie put his head on my knee. And I made a decision. Not with anger, with the kind of calm that comes when you have finally stopped hoping the inspection is going to come back clean. I opened a new account at a bank in the next town, redirected the pension and Social Security, left the old account open with $63 in it. Richard said, "Leave something because 0 looks like a decision and 63 looks like an old man who forgot to close it." We wanted the reaction at my house, not in a lawyer's office. On Tuesday, I put up a doorbell camera, $79 at the hardware store, 20 minutes on a stepladder Maggie bought me for Christmas. Then I waited 11 days. Danny called twice. Normal calls. How you doing, Dad? Did you see the game? And I sat in my kitchen talking to my son about football while $63 sat in that account like a baited hook, and I was warm and I was pleasant. And when I hung up the second time, I went out to the garage and sat on the stool Maggie used to sit on when she kept me company, and I stayed there for 40 minutes because I loved him. I want that on the record. In the middle of the evidence and the camera and the $63, I loved my son. There was one night where I got up at 2 in the morning and stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand for 5 minutes because everything in me wanted to call him and say, I know, just come here and tell me the truth and we will figure it out. What stopped me was Maggie. Not her voice, just the feeling of her, like when you walk into a room where someone has been and the air is still warm. She was in that kitchen at 2 in the morning telling me to put the phone down, and I put it down. The deposit hit the new account on a Thursday. I said out loud to nobody, it is in. 6 days later, the door shook at 4 minutes past 6. 3 hits with the flat of a hand and then a fourth. I opened it. Danny came in and said, where is it? The account has got nothing in it. Claire came in behind him and went straight to the kitchen. I heard her open Maggie's drawers one after another. The utensil drawer sticks. You have to lift it. Maggie knew that. I know that. Nobody else is supposed to know that. I heard Claire force it, and I heard the wood crack, and something went through me that was older than anger. Something about a woman's hands organizing a kitchen in 1997 and another woman's hands tearing through it 27 years later, looking for money that was never hers. Danny said, you are going to lose this house, Dad. And I said, what house? And he said, our house. There it was. My pension, my 32 years crawling under foundations, Maggie's 29 years in a classroom. That is what they had built their life on. A mortgage of $3,800 a month and 2 car payments and a country club membership, all balanced on the retirement of a dead school teacher and an old home inspector they assumed would never check a statement. Claire came out of the kitchen and said, you have destroyed our credit. And I said, the money in that account came from 32 years of a man crawling under houses and 29 years of a woman teaching children to read. Reachable does not mean yours. And then Danny put his hands on me. Both hands on my shoulders, and he put me against the wall by the coat hooks, a shove and a hold, his face 8 inches from mine. He said, you are going to call them right now and put it back. I am 67. He is 39 with 3 inches on me. I could have put him on the floor. 8 years in the Army, and some of that does not leave your hand. But if I had, then the camera shows 2 men fighting, and any lawyer calls that a dispute, and a dispute goes nowhere. So I did not move. I let my son hold his father against a wall in his own house, and I looked past his ear at a row of coat hooks I put up in 1993. The second one from the left has a scuff mark where a boy hung his backpack every day for 6 years, and the wall never recovered. And I said, in a level voice, there is a camera above the front door. It has been running since Tuesday. 9 seconds of silence. I counted them later on the file. His face went through 4 things. Disbelief, he turned and looked. He saw it. His hands came off me like I had gone electric. Claire said, that is illegal. I said, it is a doorbell camera on my own property. And Danny said the only true thing he said that morning, Dad, I was going to pay it back. I stood in that hallway and I heard every person who ever lost everything they had say the exact same words, I was going to get it back. That is the sentence that lets the whole get to 87,000 instead of stopping at 300. They left. I stood in the front room and did not move. Then I walked to the kitchen and drank the cold coffee that had been on the counter since 5:30, and I noticed the utensil drawer was cracked where Claire forced it, and it has stuck in a new place ever since. Detective Angela Martin came that afternoon. She watched the file twice and said, Mr. Hadley, why did you not push him off? I said, because my wife taught me how to wait. They arrested both of them Monday at their house in the subdivision with the stone mailbox in the 2-car garage. I did not go and I did not ask about it. Then it got bigger, which I had not expected. On 2 loan applications, Danny had described me as being in declining cognitive health. He told lenders his father was confused and unable to manage his affairs. He told them the house was worth $500,000. It is worth $210,000. And on one application in the additional notes, somebody had written that the applicant's mother recently died and the father was not coping well and required full-time financial oversight. That was Claire's handwriting. She used Maggie's death as a line on a loan application. I stood in the parking lot and I said out loud, "Maggie, you were right about all of it." The plea took 5 months. They pled to felony exploitation of an older person and forgery. Full restitution, $87,400 plus the credit and the loan. Total just under $124,000. Payments of $1,722 monthly for 6 years. Probation, mandatory counseling, no contact order, and a full allocution, meaning my son had to stand up in a courtroom and say out loud what he did. That hearing was in September. Judge Richardson's courtroom on the second floor. Danny came in, and I did not recognize him for about 2 seconds. He had lost 25 pounds. His suit was hanging on him, gray at the temples. Claire came in behind him and looked at me the way you look at a road sign. The judge asked him to state what he had done. He stood with a piece of paper shaking so bad he had to lay it flat. He said everything: the withdrawals, the timing, the forged signature, the lies to lenders, the hands on his father. And then he stopped, and the judge said, "Is there anything further?" And he looked at me for the first time and said, "I told myself every month it was the last one." And Judge Richardson said, "That is the most common sentence in this building, and it is the reason the number reaches 87,000 instead of stopping at 300. In the hallway, he tried to come toward me, and his attorney caught his arm. He stood 10 feet away, and I looked at him and opened my mouth, and nothing came out. 67 years of words, and not one was right for that hallway. I turned and walked to the elevator and heard Maggie one last time. The house always tells you Tom. Claire filed for divorce in November. Danny works 2 jobs now, warehouse during the week and weekends at an auto parts store. He lives in a studio in Garfield Heights. The payment comes on the 1st. It has not been late once in 14 months. I drive past his building sometimes, not on purpose. The route to the hardware store goes right by it. And every time I pass it, I slow down for a half second and then I speed back up and I do not stop. 14 miles between his door and mine. Closer than some people's commute. Further than some people ever get back from. I do not know what happens after the 6 years. I do not know if I will open the door when he knocks. Some mornings I think I will, and some mornings I think I will not, and most mornings I just drink my coffee and let it be what it is, which is unfinished. I have started volunteering with a housing group that fixes up homes for people who cannot afford it. I crawl under porches for free now. I check foundations and replace rotted sill plates for people who look at me with that mix of gratitude and embarrassment that comes from needing help you did not want to ask for. I understand that look now in a way I did not before. I go to the diner every morning still. Same booth, same tear in the vinyl. Helen still pours the coffee without asking, and she has never once brought up what her daughter told me. She just sets the cup down and says, "Morning, Tom," and I say, "Morning, Helen," and that is enough. Some kindnesses do not need to be discussed to be carried. Sundays I sit on the back steps with Charlie and coffee, and I look at the maples Maggie and I planted the year Danny was born. They are taller than the house now, and there is a version of quiet that is not lonely. It is just honest. I am learning to live in it. So here is what this whole thing taught me. When I was young, I thought strength was what you could push through. The Army taught me strength was what you could see that other people missed. But getting old taught me the real one. Strength is knowing the structure is not going to hold and loving it anyway and still having the sense to get out of the building. I loved my son while he was taking from me. I love him still, and I was right to change the locks. Both things true at the same time. If you cannot hold 2 true things at once, you are not ready for what family actually is. If this story stayed with you, and if it reminded you of someone who loved you quietly for decades and kept every receipt because she knew someday the proof would matter, share it with them. Subscribe so you do not miss these. And leave a comment telling me what part hits you hardest. Sometimes the people who need these words most find them because someone they know sent it their way. And tell me where you are listening from. It is evening here, and the light is coming through the maples, and Charlie is asleep on the top step with one ear folded inside out the way beagles do, and it still gets me that somebody on the other side of the world might be hearing this. Over breakfast. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.